Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett just met U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House. As this headline states, Israeli PM tells Biden he won't publicly campaign against Iran deal. Now, what is going on here? How did the meeting go? And why is that headline news? Doesn't sound so good to me. Folks, as you know, social media censorship is growing. The best way to support our video work for Israel is to subscribe to our video newsletter on pulseofisrael.com and to share our videos. If you are already a subscriber, then thank you. So this was Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's first meeting with the U.S. President since becoming Prime Minister. This is only the first time an Israeli Prime Minister other than Benjamin Netanyahu met a U.S. President in over a decade, since Netanyahu had been Prime Minister since March 2009. Let's start with the good news. It seems like it was a good meeting with our two leaders hitting it off to a good start. Not that I expected otherwise. Why? Well, President Biden needs a good relationship with Israel, especially on the heels of his recent and ongoing colossal failure with the Afghanistan pullout. And Israeli Prime Minister Bennett needs a good relationship with Biden to show Israelis that he can manage the most important foreign relationship for the benefit of Israel. Also, Biden definitely does not want to start off by pressuring Israel because that would make Bennett look weak, especially to his right-wing flank. So as far as we know, there was no pressure applied to Israel at this time from this first meeting. Now let's dive behind the big picture and delve into the details. Before I do, I just want to preface and clarify something. That when Netanyahu was Prime Minister, I would also highlight good things and also be critical of Netanyahu when necessary. I was extremely vocal against Netanyahu for giving in to the U.S. pressure to halt building Jewish homes in Judea and Samaria when Obama was president. I have always been vocal against Netanyahu for not doing everything necessary to make the changes to Israel's justice system, and much more. So that preface is important. Now let's dive into this visit with Prime Minister Bennett. Let's start with the headline. Why is Israeli Prime Minister tells Biden he won't publicly campaign against Iran deal a headline about this important meeting? Well, one needs to understand that just a few weeks ago, former Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu warned how bad a policy this would be for Israel. At the time, he was referring to Foreign Minister Yair Lapid's statement, according to which he and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken agreed on a policy of no surprises regarding Iran. At the time, Netanyahu said, quote, in his first week in office, the alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid goes and declares a policy of no surprises vis-a-vis Iran. Do you know how many American administrations demanded this kind of policy? But I never once agreed to it. The information provided to America will be leaked to the media, and in this way our counter-terrorism operations will be thwarted. This is why for the past decade I have refused the requests of American presidents that there would be no surprises. I have never agreed to always commit to informing them. If we do not have independence in this matter, we have no independence at all. End quote from former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As now being reported, Netanyahu tried to be careful in this way to protect Israel's interests from U.S. governments. As a recent report says, under Netanyahu, quote, Israel reduced intelligence sharing with the U.S. because Netanyahu didn't trust the Biden administration. This is based on information reported by the New York Times, which said that American and Israeli officials told the Times that Netanyahu had ordered officials to send less information about their plans in Iran. These officials also said that Israel, under Netanyahu, gave the U.S. less than 2 hours' notice when it attacked a nuclear plant in Iran in April, giving the U.S. no chance to influence it. According to the Times, Netanyahu had a deep mistrust of the Biden administration because, 1. Israeli officials said the U.S. leaked information about some of Israel's plans with Iran, though the U.S. denied it. Well, here is one such incident, which involved John Kerry. And it was John Kerry being accused of leaking information directly to the Iranians. And another one is referring to Biden trying to sabotage Israeli military moves. At issue is a leak to the New York Times the previous week about an attack on an Iranian ship. As the article states, and I quote, "And even as Israelis debate the consequence of that leak, the headlines were grabbed by a new operation in Iran at the nuclear facility at Natanz. Who was whispering to reporters, spilling details that according to Israel's official policy should remain secret? Are Israeli officials too eager to brag about their battlefield success? Or are Americans, in an effort to appease the Ayatollahs, trying to sabotage Israel's military efforts?" If you ask me, it's clear which one it is. Number 2, Israeli officials said the Biden administration was more focused on reviving the Iran nuclear deal than paying attention to Israel's security concerns. And 3, a former Israeli official said Netanyahu thought the U.S. was spying on him. So now we see that current Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is dismissing Netanyahu's concerns and promising President Biden a policy of no surprises, in essence allowing the Biden administration to either use leaks or apply pressure to stop Israel from taking action in our best interests, exactly what Netanyahu warned about. But that is not all. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also told President Biden in their meeting on Friday at the White House that although he is against a U.S. return to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, he, Israeli Prime Minister Bennett, isn't going to publicly campaign against it like his predecessor Benjamin Netanyahu. As documented in this Axios article, in his meetings with Biden and other senior U.S. officials, Bennett explained he wanted to manage the U.S.-Israel relationship like he manages the relationships within his eclectic government, which has many diverging views, and solve differences in direct private conversations and not in the media, Israeli officials said. On the one hand, that sounds great and very gentlemanly, but geopolitics is not about fairness. It's about pursuing the interests of your country and figuring out what to do and, if necessary, who to pressure and how to be able to implement the policies in your country's best interest. Now, one can agree or disagree with Netanyahu speaking in Congress against Obama's Iran deal, but that was a huge part of Netanyahu's public pressure upon the U.S. political establishment and public opinion that eventually brought about President Trump canceling the horrendous Iran deal that Biden wants to return to. So while this gentlemanly attitude of Bennett sounds nice to only deal things quietly behind the scenes, I believe it to be quite naive. And that is very problematic for Israel. Sometimes it is due to public pressure that U.S. administrations change their minds about decisions regarding Israel, as Netanyahu's public speech in Congress was. Now, what do the Jewish organizations in America think about this recent visit? Well, many U.S. Jewish organizational leaders are very happy with the meeting. There are some who are not, but most of them are. Not everyone understands, but many U.S. Jewish organizational leaders blame Netanyahu for a growing rift between American Jewry and Israel. But they were wrong. American Jewry's embrace of the progressive agenda is what was causing the rift between American Jews and Israel, turning more and more American Jews against their own authentic Jewish identity, as well as away from and even turning them against Israel. And even with Naftali Bennett as prime minister, leading a government which includes the most progressive and even anti-Israel elements of Israel's political system, that won't change the progressive Americans' views on Israel. It's the exact opposite. It will embolden their voices and activity because now they have anti-Israel partners in Israel's government. So why do they have to change their views? Something Netanyahu understood is that in order to protect Israel, one must not give in to the pressures of the left. Yes, Netanyahu himself did sometimes as well, but as little as possible and only when he had to in order to pursue Israel's greater interests. But Prime Minister Bennett has sold the whole store to the left in Israel, in essence not really having power over his own government's agenda, since he is the leader of a tiny party, while Yair Lapid, his partner, leader of Yesh Atid, the largest party in the government, is the one who really runs the show. And each individual minister running his or her own ministry run it according to his or her own ideological agenda, meaning the leftist ministers are running it according to their leftist agenda. And Naftali Bennett, as the leader of a tiny right-wing party, just does not have enough political power to stop any minister from doing what he or she wants to do with their ministries. If he would try to stop them from implementing their policies that he is against, his government could easily fall apart. It is that simple. That's coalition politics, especially with him being the leader of such a tiny party. So that is a high-level overview of this recent prime ministerial presidential visit. I hope you understand a little bit more of what is going on. In any case, let us hope and pray that the future is bright for both of our countries going through the rocky times we're going through, regardless of whom our leaders are. As I always say, our future is up to us. And the first step is learning the truth and sharing the truth. So thank you for watching me at the Pulse of Israel.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.